All right, here we go. Chapter 19, The Art of Asia. And really, you probably have seen in this book so far how we started sort of with what became Western ideas, and now we're sort of moving to the East with Eastern ideas. And it's important to note that many of these uh, civilizations sort of happening at corresponding times. So on the timeline, really, there's a lot of overlapping going on, but because of that overlapping, we kind of group it to sort of continents or regions. And the earliest civilization that we see in Asia happens in India, in what is known as the Indus Valley or the Mohenjo-daro. And this early civilization is another one of those mysterious, like, so where did they go sort of situations, because what we see is a very highly sophisticated city, right, from the ruins. And if you watch the YouTube link, you'll see those ruins, and what is going on. But we see this highly sophisticated civilization that has basically sort of indoor plumbing in some regards, the way that the water networks can move inside little houses and dwellings. They have sort of public pools, right? They have a way of like a sewage, getting rid of human waste. Um, and so we realize that as a civilization is concerned, they're highly sophisticated. Now, with that, you would imagine that you would see more identification of human life, really. But besides the ruins, we're not seeing a whole lot. One thing that we do find quite a bit, or which is represented in the image there, is this seal, and it's called the yogi seal because what we see is sort of this figure that has been told that maybe there's a face here on the side, one looking at us and another one looking to the side. And then, so it's almost got three faces, but then it's in this yoga sort of position. Now you have this interesting headdress that's maybe a little anthropomorphic. We see a lot of animals around on the sides. And with Mohenjo-daro, one thing that we do know is that their contact with other civilizations was very prevalent. We know that they were a mass trading merchant community. We have images and pieces that come from Mesopotamia and the way to Egypt, and so they are traveling along and trading with quite a few people, interacting with quite a few people. And what this is, this piece, and there's several examples that we find in this, is that this is a seal that would have been like a stamp, almost like if you can imagine sort of a signature, but like of goods. So we see sort of the bundle of wheat down here, some of the animals, and then which is pretty much like cuneiform looking script up top, or even somewhat hieroglyphic in ways. And what these are is that these are seals that would have been pressed into wax, that would have been bound around a certain merchant's goods, right? So that way, if that wax seal was broken, then we know that you gotten into. But anyway, this is sort of there. This is my stuff. This is how it's kind of traversing. So a very interesting civilization, and the first that we encounter in Asia. What is probably the biggest movement, though, that really starts the image making is Buddhism. Now, Hinduism is the main religion in India. It is the most predominant and is still that way. But Buddhism comes also out of India. And Siddhartha Gautama is sort of the eminent that we know as Buddha, who comes up with the tenets and the ways of what is known as the Buddhist teaching, right? And he has a very interesting life story where he's born a prince, never taken outside the palace walls, very much sheltered and protected, and given anything that he wants. So his life really only knows pleasure. It's when he gets older and he's married, has a kid, and he's traveling outside the gates that he sees sickness, he sees death, he sees suffering, and those things really make an impact on him to the point where he leaves his family, his wife and infant son, and goes to seek sort of a spiritual awakening or wisdom towards how do you solve these issues, how do you solve pain, how do you solve suffering. And through there, he puts himself through lots of different ideas and mystics, and one of them is the idea that for a period of time he was only living off of 1 grain of rice a day. So he's his body is deteriorating. You sleep on a bed of nails, right? You walk across coals, like anything to sort of like cause pain and suffering. And if you had so much pain and suffering, your body soon would maybe just become detached and numb to it all. So there's that sort of belief. Then there was others that were about you'd only live off the graces of others. So, you could eat whatever, but it had to become from sort of like a begging status. So he goes through all these different trials until he stumbles across um, uh, what is known as sort of the Satan of sort of like Buddhist religion, and he's tempted by this demon, and he's able to sort of like shut him down, and from there he realized sort of the enlightenment and that he has the ability that he has, and he attracts a lot of followers, and as we know today is still very large. But Buddhism doesn't really catch on so much in India as much as we're going to see it later on. But that's sort of the beginning of Siddhartha Gautama and Buddhism. Now, with Buddhism, we see some very specific things. Now, in other religions, the building was a place of it was like a temple or worship and was mimicked off others. Well, this structure called a stupa, and there's a lot of great information in the link, please watch it, is kind of like is a burial mound more than it was a structure meant to be like a temple. But there's a worship procession that happens, and the idea is you'd walk through this gate, this front gate here, and you would be able to traverse around this mound or this dome, right? We have some very symbolic elements that all stupas will contain, whether they're Indian, Chinese, or Japanese, it doesn't really matter. And so these places became areas of pilgrimages. Now, originally there was only 8 relics, like Christian relics, that were housed when the Buddha died, eight parts of his body that were then put into these 8 stupas. So they were very few and limited. But as Buddhism did grow across, there was an emperor who actually reopened all those tombs and then took even more pieces and then sort of spread them out. And we see a lot of then different forms of the stupa created. But usually what happens is that we have in the front gate a lot of images and carvings, either of the Buddha's life or his reincarnations before he became the Buddha. So the idea that he had 1,000 lives before he ever was human and obtained the Buddha. So there's this little bit of that reincarnation that comes from Hinduism that happens. It's not that you would actually enter into these places. The idea of worship is walking around. So that's one of the big differences than like Islam or Christianity, is that these structures are not meant to be sort of in. They're just supposed to be sort of a part of the ritual. We also see in Buddhist art the image of Buddha that comes around, and from there we have Lakshana, which is a term used for the different icons of Buddha, and specifically something like the mudras, or these hand gestures. So when you look at the hands, right, there are several different types of hand gestures that can be made, but they are sort of in reference to the Buddha. We also see it looks like a top knot, but actually it's a cranial bump. The idea that imagine sort of like almost like another enlightened wisdom or brain or something, but we see it sort of as a top knot, but it's actually meant to be sort of a bump on the skull that is very synonymous with the enlightened Buddha. We also see this sort of sun disk shape that's behind, and there are several other ways, be it the pose, the elongated earlobes. Sometimes there's sort of like the animals or something, the features. There's a lot of things that go into being a Buddha, even if they look different. So even the illustration here on the left compared to one of the images on the right, are both of the Buddha, and they both contain different sort of meanings, but they're all symbolic of the Buddhist, or of the Buddha. And this iconography will continue to be carried through all the cultures that it represents, and those Buddhas will change. So sometimes you think of the Buddha as this big sort of statue, and everybody rubs its belly for good luck. Well, that's very synonymous with sort of the late Chinese and even Japanese Buddhists. So just so you can already understand how the differences are. Now, Hinduism, like I said, is the main, and they have 33 million gods in the pantheon of Buddhism or in Hinduism. And in Hinduism, and I am no expert on either of these religions, and so this one's is a little bit harder to talk about because it's so sort of open. There are some main deities, kind of like what we'd see in Greek mythology. So we have Vishnu here, Krishna, and you can think of like the multi-armed goddess that's also of like war, but also of peace and love. And so they kind of carry on that same sort of symbolism like Greek mythology did. However, there are layers and layers of these gods, and they also take several forms. But Hinduism itself, and when you see some of the other examples that I have out there, is its religion is very similar, I would say, in sort of this idea of trying to reach enlightenment, and that all your deeds are sort of weighed against you, and so if they're bad, then you digress when you're reincarnated, but if they're good, then you can move forward, and hopefully you've continued to lead a good enough life that in the next level you can be reincarnated as something else. But like I said, I'm no professional on this, but the temples themselves are what's really sort of beautiful, and there are two styles, one from the north and one from the south that we have. Some are called beehive structures, and what we're seeing here is one of those structures, and we still see some iconography, kind of like a stupa, right, where we have those Yasti stones up top, which is sort of that spiritual connection between the sky and the earth, something we've also seen in Egyptian art and such. What we have, though, are these sort of layers. They almost look very organic in their ways, and on there are these carvings. And these carvings actually usually are predominantly pretty sexual, and in the YouTube link they may even show that, because the idea of spiritual enlightenment can come through a sexual act. And so we have that, but we also have some of the gods. We can see the multi-arm, right, Shiva here, and they'll be covered. So that, if you can imagine having 33 million gods in your pantheon of gods, right, this whole building is just going to be completely covered within those carvings, but it makes them highly ornate and very, very beautiful. So as Buddhism leaves India, it really gets collected and used and inspires, which at this time is like sort of several states. China is not unified, and there are several sort of warring states with one another. And Emperor Qi, that we know, which is why we now call it China, or where it comes in. He's the first to bring all of China into one empire, right? And he has to do it sort of not only in a violent way, but then also has to mandate quite a few things. Like he has to standardize the writing, the language, all of this sort of stuff that hadn't happened before. So he's the first one really sort of lays the stones. He definitely was sort of like the dictator, where he had to rule with an iron fist and sort of wipe out people. But there was a lot of mythology about him until one day, just like we've talked about before with Pompey and others, a farmer is excavating or digging with his plow, and he hits this terracotta face. And as he's digging, he finds more and more of these. And of course, that was 1974, right? So fairly early in discovery. And what is found is the Terracotta Army. So please watch the Canopy film on your Moodle shell. Check out the link. This is an amazing, amazing topic. And and there's just a lot to do. But Chinese calligraphy is also very popular and is another form of writing, and where they invented paper. So now we're seeing paper come on the scene, and this changes the entire world for what we can do and how we can preserve objects. So we're going to come back and see a little bit about Japan in this next